I don't want to be at my laptop all day. I don't want to be in an office all day. And when I'm working with clients, as much as possible, I want it to be outside.
You went on a grand adventure over 10 weeks, walking 1,000 miles across each of the 10 English national parks, tackling on some of the most beautiful spots that we have in England and celebrated because of their national park status.
I think most people thought I was a bit crazy. They were like, that's a long time. 10 weeks is a long time because you're somewhere different every night. But walking is actually much easier than day-to-day life. When all you have to do each day is get from A to B and make sure you feed yourself and you've got somewhere to sleep, it's a nice life.
You chose the English national parks, of which there are 10. And so points and prizes for anyone who can name all 10 of them. I want you to take me and the listeners on a whistle-stop tour of your tour. I live a nomadic lifestyle and I'm never in one place for too long. So from time to time, I find it very convenient to order groceries in the form of a Gusto box. I've been using Gusto for nearly 5 years now. It's a delivery company that sends you fresh food and all the ingredients you need to cook delicious meals at home, along with very easy to follow recipe cards. They have over 90 recipes every week, so there really is something for everyone. And so many of their recipes I've returned to again and again because their meals are just delicious. I've got a referral code. I've shared it with so many of my friends. It means they get cheap groceries on their first few boxes and I get credit in return. I'll link it below. Use it to sign up and you get a pretty hefty discount off your first box. There's no subscription required and you can order just one box whenever you want. Oh, well, thank you, Jen, for joining me. I feel that your experience today being in London is probably a slight contrast to what you've been going through in the last week. First of all, you live in the Peak District, which is a completely different kind of scene to the busy London life. But last week, you were also completely disconnected from the entire world.
Yes, I was very disconnected and being back in London, back with my phone, with my laptop. It has been quite jarring. It was a really special experience last week. I was on a 6-day, it was a training course, but it was in nature and it was about nature facilitation. So I do a lot of facilitation work and this is about kind of taking my work into nature, helping people connect with nature. And so we were all also connecting with nature. And there was just over 20 of us, including the people running the course and volunteers. And they strongly encouraged going full digital detox. So I actually bought myself a Casio $9.99 watch because they said you probably need a timekeeper, and I've normally got my Apple Watch. And I've now, I'm not using my Apple Watch anymore. I quite like just having a regular thing without notifications vibrating on my wrist as well as on my phone. It's really hard to explain the experience. Like it was such a, I want to say life-changing. I want to also kind of say spiritual, but that word doesn't feel very me. But it was just a really beautiful experience. I learned a lot. I met some incredible people. I connected with nature. And I think if anything, it's just really distilled what I want from my life going forward. And I know that has to include being in nature more. I don't want to be at my laptop all day. I don't want to be in an office all day. And when I'm working with clients, as much as possible, I want it to be outside. There's so much I could talk about, but I'm still kind of processing the experience, I think, and trying not to get too bogged down into the busy, stressful way of life.
It can be incredibly difficult in this modern world to fully disconnect. Many of us can try. We can go on holiday and put our phones away, but generally we might check in the morning, check in the evening. There seems to be this kind of need to feel like you just need to know what's going on in the world. So how was that feeling in those first few days for you? Because you completely went cold turkey. You threw away all your devices. And just had a watch that told
so
the
I
time.
just had my watch, and I was quite anxious about doing it. And I was like, actually, I want to be able to contact my partner. I want to be able to check in. I'm not going to have my phone in. And I did call my partner once just to check in, but I got somebody else to turn my phone on and dial him so that I didn't get distracted by notifications coming through, and then I turned my phone straight off after, and I told him I wasn't going to ring him again because I'd kind of said I was going to ring him. I was like, I can't now, I've decided I don't want to. I'm like, actually, I'm quite liking this. So the first couple of days I kept reaching for my phone. I also kept really wanting to take photos because I'm always taking photos. I take so many photos, putting lots of stuff on Instagram. It's just kind of this natural urge in me. And there was just so many incredible, beautiful moments, like the campfire and the food and the people and the woodland and so many things. I was like, oh my God, the photo. But I couldn't. But after a couple of days, I noticed those urges kind of going away. So it didn't really take that long and I didn't really miss it. And yeah, I want to do it again. And it is hard. It took planning. So I always get to tell my clients I wasn't going to be contactable. I've got quite a busy week this week. So I had to make sure everything was kind of pre-prepared and clients had what they needed in advance. I also run a small co-working space. And so normally when I'm on holiday, I'm able to put an away message up for my client work. But for my co-working space, I've kind of always got emails coming in of bookings and things. And so I never end up really switching off. But this time I gave my partner the emails, the logins, and he dealt with it. So I didn't have to worry about that. It took planning. But I'm so glad in the end I actually stuck with it. And I then became quite anxious of turning my phone back on and dealing with like messages and emails and things. So I really want to change my relationship with my phone now. It's 2 days in and I still haven't downloaded the app that kind of limits my time on social media, but I am going to do that. And I've got a few kind of plans I want to try and put in place because it's different. I think the main thing I found is how much more present you are. So I'm always checking my phone, you know, I'm having a conversation with someone. I can't help it. It's such an addiction. But I found that I really, truly listened to people and really built quite strong connections with people in just a few days that maybe if we'd all been on our phones taking photos and checking emails, it wouldn't have quite been the same.
I guess it's so easy when you may not know something about someone or you're not getting a right kind of vibe from someone just to kind of settle for comfort where you know it exists in your phone and contacting other people and other friends. But actually this forces you to really try harder with the interactions of the people around you. Talk about some of the experiences you had, because you had a group of people, you were there for several days, you were completely disconnected, you were out in nature. What kind of things were you doing? So
the days took on a routine, I guess. So we'd be woken up in our tents by somebody singing outside our tent. We'd have the first singing, and then 10 minutes later it would be the kind of like, okay, you've got to get up now. We'd have some kind of morning practice. So maybe it was like, I can't remember how it's called, but like Cha Gung. It's kind of like Tai Chi, but different. Or we'd do some stretching or whatever. And then the day would kind of flow. We'd learn stuff. We'd go out in nature. We played a lot of games that was quite fun. There was a lot of laughter. But there was also some moments of real deep connection, like with each other or with nature. I cried a few times, which is not anyone who knows me. I do that a lot.
What was bringing that on in those moments?
I think a lot of it was that connection and that like, oh my God, this is where I want to be. We did also talk about the pain in the world. So we had some quite deep conversations about that sometimes. So that obviously brings up a lot of emotions. But a lot of it was kind of almost happy tears, almost like relief, I guess, of I'm so glad I did this course. Like I was quite nervous about it. I was worried it was maybe going to be a bit too hippy dippy. By the end of it, I was like, bring on all the hippiness. We were singing together. We had a night of bivy bagging outside. So we had a 12-hour kind of solo outdoor overnight adventure, and you could decide what you wanted to do. So some people felt comfortable, they wanted to stay in their tents. Other people maybe brought their like sleeping bag and stuff outside, just outside their tent. Other people went off into the woods with their bivvy bag. So I took my bivvy bag and I went and slept in the long grass near a pond. And I've wild camped before on my own and things, but and I've got a bivvy bag, and I've also got a tent that's it's like a long thin tent that I can just lie in. So I've done wild camping in that, but I was kind of like, oh, you know what? I might end up going back to my tent. We'll see how it goes. And I nestled in at about 9 p.m. I'd watched the sunset. And I was like, oh, why did I choose to lie in the long grass? I was like, there's ticks, there's bugs everywhere. When I put my blow up mattress in, there was like slugs on my mattress. And so I was like, oh, and I started to get all these nerves. Anyway, the next thing I knew, I woke up and it was 2:00 in the morning, and I'd literally just passed out and had this incredible sleep. And I just woke up to go to the loo and then kind of got back into bed and passed out again. So I slept so well outside, and every morning, whether we were in the tent or the bivvy bag, we would be woken about 4:30 by the dawn chorus. And I noticed it even more when I was outside, and I kept kind of drifting in and out of sleep from about 4:30 till like 7 a.m. And it was like they were tuning in together, because you get different birds start at different times of day, and just things like that when you're in a building, even in the countryside where I live, like, you know, if I've got my windows closed, like I don't really hear much. And even if I've got my windows open, there's other sounds inside, or there's the road, or so yeah, it was just a really special experience, and I know that I want to do something like that again. And just spending more time outside. So one of the things they recommended at the end is to find a sit spot, which is, basically where you find a spot outside in nature and you just go back to it as often as you can. So maybe you do it twice a week, maybe you do it every day throughout.
This is somewhere local to you.
Yeah, so it could just be in your garden. So I think I'm going to do it in my garden, because it needs to be something easy. The harder it is, the less likely you're going to do it. So like I could easily find somewhere like up the top of the hill with the great views near where I live, but I'm not going to get there all the time. Whereas my garden, I can just step outside and you just see the changes in nature, and you really become more connected to it and notice things. So I think a lot of it is about noticing. We talked a lot about our senses. There was lots of kind of putting masks on and being present with the sound. There was lots of kind of going in close to things. And even tasting. They'd make us like tea with herbs that were on the land that we were staying on, and things like that. So I need to keep it alive. And I think that's going to be hard, because the real world is so busy and there's so many distractions. And I think that was the thing. It's the distractions. Our phone is such a massive distraction. And when you don't have it, and you don't have your laptop or your watch or whatever it might be, and you are just in the moment, it's kind of almost forced upon you. But I just feel I just came away from it thinking like, everybody needs this. Like, how do we get that? So everybody needs this. Like, what difference would it make if, I don't know, some of the billionaires in the world spent some time away from their phones and just in nature? Would they see things differently and want to do business differently? Or I've got to help more people.
Yeah, it is a practice, isn't it? And it's a shame that it has become that, because we all are human, and this is a very human experience that you're having, but we've forgotten about this because everything is so geared towards distracting us, disconnecting us from being present, because there's always something else going on. There's always more information to learn. Yeah. And actually sometimes it is just nice just to sit and do nothing and listen and feel your senses and notice life in that moment. And I think camping is such a sacred experience that allows you to do that, because you're stripped away from the four walls of a man-made building, and you cannot escape being in nature, like you said, hearing the bird song, or having your circadian rhythm matched to the setting sun and the rising sun, and knowing that when it gets dark, you go to sleep.
Yeah.
You don't turn the TV on, you don't turn your lights on, and when it gets light, you wake up.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's just such a natural way of doing life.
What was this course that you did? What was it called?
So it was nature facilitation. So basically it's around facilitating groups of people in nature to help them connect better to nature. But lots of different people were on the course. So there might be, there was coaches, there was people who worked in wellbeing, people who worked for the NHS, people like me who were already facilitators. So everyone kind of had different things they wanted to get from it. So my plan, I do a lot of kind of strategy development, facilitation, team building, away days, ways of working, that kind of stuff, mainly with charities. So I want to kind of keep doing that, but bring the nature connection into it. So it's kind of, if you're developing a strategy, even if you're not an environmental organisation, how can you learn from nature in some of those decisions? But also, like, it's such an incredible bonding experience for your teammates. So I kind of want to carry on doing what I'm doing, but doing it outside wherever possible, which is hard with the weather because, you know, it was a beautiful week last week, which helps everything. If it had been chucking it down with rain, it would be a bit different. But even then, that's a different experience. So, but it can be a bit of a harder ask to corporate groups or a whole organisation to come away and be trying to plan a strategy in the rain. There's got to kind of be some undercover alternatives. But yeah, so it was a mix of kind of learning how to do it and practical information and practicing doing it, but also just doing it ourselves. So we were being facilitated through different processes, which we could then take away and do with other people. Yeah.
I know you're still processing that experience because it must have been so profound in not only being able to reconnect with nature and be present, but in probably understanding some of your own emotions and thoughts and feelings and perspective on the world. But what do you think will be the key takeaways that you'll have in your personal life that you can practice going forward? You talked about having apps on your phones, and I have my own personal opinion on that. I think there's, you know, productivity apps and blocking apps which somehow never seem to work, because certainly with the blocking apps there's always a way around it.
Yeah.
And how much do you, I mean, I've got an app on my laptop which could block off the entire internet for however long I set it for, and there's no way back. I can turn it off and on again and it'll still be blocked. I'm very careful when I use that and only time it for like hour or two segments, for fear of, if I did it for a whole day, what if, you know, I needed to go on the internet for some other reason. It's handy in the short term, but even then I can choose not to block it completely, but just have a switch button which I can turn on and off. Or on my phone, there's always workarounds.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it has to extend beyond having apps. The apps are a tool and they can be useful, but there needs to be more of a mindset and that relationship with technology. But how do you practice that and keep continuing that? Is it just a case of always coming back to nature and making sure that you schedule that into your life going forward?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure I fully know the answer. And I think it's something that I'm still working through. So I think accountability helps. So we had buddies throughout the weeks. We had a buddy, and then we also had what they called home groups. So I had one person that we were kind of checking in on each other, and then there was a group of 5 of us that would also check in over breakfast each day. And so they've again encouraged kind of checking in with your buddies and your home groups for some accountability. So my buddy Zoe and I have already messaged a couple of times, and I think we're trying to like see how we can implement some of that accountability, because I think that's the thing. I was thinking about that today, and I was like, I did it because I had to. Well, I didn't have to. A couple of people did keep their phones for caring responsibilities or whatever, but they were quite secret about it, so you didn't really see phones around. But the fact that we were all doing it, like as soon as one person put their phone in the basket, you're like, oh, okay, I should do this too. Because before I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to, at night, I'm just going to be checking. But because other people were, I was like, I want to join the group. So there's something about that accountability and collectiveness. So I think keeping the relationships alive from the week and checking in with each other. You're right about the apps. I mean, I haven't even downloaded the apps yet, and it's like day 3 since I got back. So that's not going very well. And I have been on my phone a lot. But I'm kind of like, well, I did just have 6 days off. And it comes at a cost. These apps, you can get free versions.
Well, yeah.
But if you want the full package, you have to pay a subscription. And then it's the case, why am I paying for you to block my
I know,
phone?
it's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Yeah, maybe I don't need an app. I just need to be strong.
But we're not strong.
No, we're not. And they're made to addict us.
A mighty force, these phones and the social media.
And the companies that run them. Yeah.
And it's not our fault. We should never feel bad about that. And we should recognise that. I think that's important.
Yeah, no, exactly. They are made to have us be addicted to them. Like, that is the point of them. So I think there is an element of, not being hard on yourself. So doing what works for you. And maybe it's a case of, I just need to schedule in this time every month, 2 months, whatever it might be, where I tell, everyone knew, like, I told my parents, I told my partner, there was an emergency camp phone number. My partner had access to my co-working emails. So like, there was things I put in place to make it possible, but you can't do that all the time. You can't be like, right, I'm not going to be contactable anymore. But I have been thinking about it, and I've been debating like maybe getting a Nokia.
A burner phone,
which is what my dad has. My dad's never done, he does emails, but he just has a regular phone. I think I've had one text message from my dad ever that said, call me. Which probably took him about an hour to type out. Because that way people can ring you. Because when I did call my partner on the Thursday night, so we were there from Tuesday to Sunday, I really enjoyed talking to him. Like, it felt like more meaningful, more special, because I hadn't spoken to him for 3 days. And like, there's something about, we're constantly like WhatsApping our friends, and and then you don't actually have that meaningful connection of call. I rarely call my friends anymore. And even my friends that I used to call, I now just voice note them. So we've never actually got that two-way conversation. So I don't know the answer, but I'm going to work through it. And I am determined to kind of keep some of those feelings from the last week alive and putting some things in place.
That's a beautiful example of why modern technology can be very good for us in connecting us on that human level. The phone was a great invention that enabled communication to go transatlantic.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a beautiful thing, that you could have a connection with a loved one because you don't want to disconnect so completely that it's going to be to your own detriment. And if you've got someone who can support you and make you feel loved and welcoming, and you want to hear that voice, that's fine. You don't have to kind of shut yourself off for 6 days completely and go complete cold turkey. What made you want to do the course in the first instance?
So last year I did a big hike, 1,000 miles over every national park in England. And so I spent a lot of time outside. I was definitely not disconnected. My phone was like my lifeline. It was my directions. It was, my camera, my communication tool. But I did spend a lot of time outside, and a lot of time on my own as well. Well, with my dog. I was with my dog. And so I came out of that a bit lost when I got home, like coming back to, again, the real world, whatever we want to call it, normal, life as normal. Just sitting at my desk again. I love my co-working space. I love it. I love the people. It's great. But just like back to being at a computer, I was just kind of like, what am I doing? I feel like I'd lost my purpose. Like none of my work kind of had the same meaning. And I work in the charity sector, so I do stuff that has meaning, I think. But I was just craving that
time outside. And so I started Googling I was like, right, how can I bring my skills but doing it outside? So I think I was Googling things like outside facilitation and stuff like that, and this course came up, and I was like reading it, and it took me a while to sign up because I was like, is it a bit far out there? But really I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do, like this is it. So I think it was that kind of journey of I spent all that time outside. I knew I needed to be outside more. I can't really make much money from just hiking all the time. So how do I kind of marry the two, I guess? This course came along.
Your adventure that you talked about, you went on a grand adventure over 10 weeks, walking 1,000 miles across each of the 10 UK national parks. You took your dog, Cookie, with you. You walked, I guess, a length of each park from one end to another, trying to find the longest axis.
Yeah.
So these weren't just short little walks in each park. You did it continuously over 10 weeks as well, traveling in between all of them, tackling on some of the most beautiful spots that we have in England and celebrated because of their national park status.
Yeah.
Before we go into this, actually, I want to talk a bit about national parks and other places of interest. Because I think it's actually a really cool thing to talk about, especially this is Great British Adventures. Why not talk about the British topics? You chose the English national parks, of which there are 10. And so points and prizes for anyone who can name all 10 of them. I couldn't, although from the list, I think I've been to 8.
Okay.
So I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to try and list them in perhaps maybe popular order, maybe first.
Okay.
So I imagine the Lake District is going to be one on the top of people's tongues that comes off as one of the English national parks, and then the Peak District. I feel like they might be the two popular, and this might be controversial now going forward into how I then order them. I'm going to put Dartmoor next, and it all depends on your geography and where you live in the UK.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of sheer scale as well. Dartmoor kind of and wilderness strikes me as some place. So there's 3. Next on the list, I will choose Exmoor. Then I'll choose the South Downs. So there's the top 5, I think, are probably the most known, but that's coming from my own personal experience.
Yeah, you're from the South, yeah.
Exactly. So that is definitely, so people listening who live in the North are probably like, what are you on about? I don't know any of these places. So let me tick off some of the more northern ones. The Yorkshire Dales is one of them.
Yeah.
That's 6. Then I'm going to go back down south, excuse me, while I'm here, to the New Forest.
Okay.
So we're thinking 7.
Yeah.
And then there are these two I haven't been to, so which is why they're not top of my list. But I think I know of one of them, so Northumberland. And actually, that should be in the top 5, actually. Forgive me, I should have put that, because I know that is an area of extreme wilderness up in the very northeastern England. And then there's North York Moors. And then the last one, which I never knew was a national park, is the Norfolk Broads.
Yeah, so it's actually just the Broads.
Okay.
So because I called it Norfolk Broads.
Oh, because
it has a bit of Suffolk.
Excuse me.
And it's the one that is a bit different because it's a national park, but they also have kind of waterway responsibilities because it is primarily water. So some people say it's not an official national park, but they would say they are. They just kind of have a dual responsibility. So it's a bit different to some of the others. And it is a very different national park because it is mainly water. So, yeah.
So they're the 10 English national parks. I cannot list those without listing the other national parks in the UK, where there's 5 more, 3 of them in Wales and 1 of them in Scotland. So again, points.
Two in Scotland.
Sorry, 3 in Wales, 2 in Scotland. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, points and prizes. You can name them. And so I'll start with Wales. There is and I'm going to try their Welsh name.
I was going to say, I don't know the Welsh
I'm
names.
going to butcher it. I did my research. Let's see if it comes out on the recording. Okay, so the probably the most popular one in Wales, Erie.
Oh, that was good.
Formerly known as Snowdonia.
Yeah.
Then there's Banaw Brycheiniog. Oh, hang on. Let me just get that pronunciation even better. Banaw Brycheiniog, which is formerly known as the Brecon Beacons. And then one, I don't think I actually really knew this was a national park as well, but I have visited and I know it's an amazing area, is the Pembrokeshire coast. Mm-hmm. They're the 3 in Wales, and there's 2 in Scotland, the Cairngorms and Loch Lomond and the Trossachs. And I'd been to Loch Lomond, but I didn't know what the Trossachs was. And so I did my Googling, and it's basically just an area that's kind of extends further than Loch Lomond that it contains other lochs and glens and things like that. So they are the 15 UK national parks.
Yeah, and it's growing soon as well. They're going to choose another one in the next year or so.
Okay. Now, I was going to come on to this because there is there's like a second tier of amazing places that haven't got national park status.
Yeah.
Formerly known as Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty.
Yeah.
They've changed that very recently, late last year, to now become national landscapes. So there's 46 areas in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And these are places that have been designated for conservation due to its significant landscape value. And I might refer to them as area outstanding natural beauty because that's how I've known them my whole life, but they're called national landscapes now. They're in the process of rebranding that. And I guess I really want to talk about this because anyone who's looking to holiday in the UK and want to explore somewhere new, even if you just go on Google Maps, you can find these national parks or these area of outstanding natural beauties, or some of them are now called national landscapes. And if you can see one that you've never been to, click on it and go there, because these places are incredible places. They are usually places full of wilderness and wildlife and adventure.
Yeah, I love them.
So they're going to choose another new national park.
Yeah, so they are, I think there's a short list. I know the Cotswolds is one. I can't remember. I think there's one of the wolds up north, I think, like the edge of the North York Moors. Maybe it's just the Yorkshire Wolds. I can't remember. But yeah, they're looking to choose another national park. And I'm not sure if it's one in England, one in Wales, one in Scotland, or whether it's just one overall. But yeah, it's a bit, I don't want to say it's controversial, but it's basically kind of, it's welcomed because obviously if you're a national park, you get money from the government they have their own authorities. National landscapes don't have their own authorities, but they have their own national park authorities. However, the question is, the funding from government is going down every year for national parks, and actually the need is going up because more people are visiting our national parks, which is really good. But obviously the more people there, the more kind of degradation and the more needs. And so if they're going to add this new national park but not add any more money, so the money gets kind of split between 16 national parks instead of 15, then that's going to cut the money even more. So it's a bit of a funny one. But yeah, ultimately it's welcomed because they come with kind of different rules and things to look after the landscapes. So it's good for the natural world. And
you can talk about this actually because you are on the Peak District Foundation board.
Yes.
We'll come back to that later if you don't mind, because I want to talk about this adventure of you taking on the English national parks.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to visit and walk across and go on a very long adventure, 10 weeks, 1,000 miles?
Yeah.
Driving in between the two.
And then public transport. Yeah.
Okay. And then having to hike for many days at a time.
Yeah.
Across them.
Yeah. There's lots of reasons, really. I'm quite a restless person. I do a lot of stuff. So I'm always kind of looking for new challenges, new things to do. And I'd kind of wanted to do some kind of personal physical challenge for a while. And it was going to be just like more of a personal challenge. And I thought about doing the coast to coast walk, which is quite a popular one. And then I was kind of thinking, well, actually, if I was doing something big, I could also make this a fundraiser for the Peak District National Park Foundation, which I'm chair of trustees for. So then I was like, well, I should do something in the Peak District if I'm going to raise money for the Peak District. And so I started looking into things, and like most things have already been done. So like there's a route that goes around the like edge of the Peak District. There's you can do the Ethels, which is all the higher peaks in the Peak District. There's things like that, but lots of people have done those things before. So I wanted to do something a bit different that hadn't been done before. So I kind of thought, actually, maybe this is a chance to learn more about our other national parks. So there's certain ones I'd visited quite a lot. So the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales and the Yorkshire Moors, like they're the ones that I would go to as a kid and as an adult. They're the ones that are closest to me. So they're the ones I knew the best. But I didn't really know the others. I mean, I've been down to Devon and Cornwall a lot, but I haven't really been to Exmoor and Dartmoor. Like I've probably maybe stopped in a village en route as a child, but I've certainly hadn't really done any hiking. And again, I'd driven through the New Forest to get to the coast I think I was reviewing somewhere for my blog. But yeah, there was lots of areas that I hadn't been to. So I kind of saw it as like part personal challenge, part fundraiser, and then part like learning mission, I guess, what makes each national park unique, which I'm still kind of working out, or what are the similarities, what are the projects that are happening within them. So it kind of became this bigger thing, and I wanted it to be a challenge that felt like a challenge, that felt kind of big enough but not too crazy. Like I'm not a runner, I'm not a cycler, like I'm not really a climber, although I did hike up the highest peak in each national park as well as walking across the longest axis, because I do like hiking up a mountain, although some of them have bumps rather than mountains, particularly the Broads and the New Forest. So it was a combination of reasons really, and this felt like 10 weeks is a long time. It's a long time to be off work and take out of regular life, but it also felt manageable. So, and then I started telling people, and I was like, I'm just going to put it out there, because if you start telling people, so it's the same, maybe that's what I need to do with my relationship with my phone, start telling people what I'm going to do. And then the more people you tell, the more you're like, I can't back out now, I've got to do it.
Did you find that bouncing that idea, you kind of got the enthusiasm back from people that kind of allowed you to be like, okay, yeah, this has legs?
I think most people thought I was a bit crazy. They were like, that's a long time. And there were definitely people that didn't think I would do it.
Why? Why didn't they think you'd do it?
Because I'm not really a big hiker. Now I guess I am. Like I wasn't someone, like I guess I'm more of a hiker than the average person, in that I would go on holiday and we would probably do a walk, right? But we'd probably do like 4 or 5 miles maybe. I was doing like 15, 20 miles a day. And I had done 13 years ago when I went traveling. In fact, this time 13 years ago, I was probably just about reaching Everest base camp. So not the peak, the bottom of Everest on a trekking trip in Nepal. So I'd done like the odd thing like that. But I certainly wasn't someone who was like out on the hills every weekend. So I think they were kind of like, are you sure? Do you have the fitness? Do you have the stamina? My dad was probably quite concerned at first that like I needed a lot longer to train. I needed longer to prepare. And in some ways you can always have longer, but I also know that if I don't just get on and do it, I'm not going to do it. So I gave myself, I think I decided in the January, February, and I left in August. So it was still like a good 6-7 month window for the training. And I needed that time, especially for the prep as well. It's a lot of logistics planning. But once I committed to it, my dad was, he was super supportive and helping me along the way. But I think people just didn't believe it until I really upped the training and the planning, and I got sponsors, and then it became really real. So yeah, if you ever want to do a big challenge, just tell everyone, and then you're less likely to back out.
And what are those people saying now that you completed it?
Yeah, I mean, I think my dad and my family are very proud of me for completing it. My partner always says, there was a lot less drama than I expected. I kind of just got on with it. I was really worried I'm quite accident prone. Like, I've broken many bones and had various accidents. So, and because I was fundraising and aiming to raise quite a lot, I was like, oh my God, what do I do if like I just get too tired and I physically can't do it? Or if I twist my ankle or, but none of that happened. And so all the fears, it was actually relatively smooth. I kind of expected lots of dramas, and I think lots of people expected lots of dramas. But walking is actually much easier than day-to-day life. When all you have to do each day is get from A to B and make sure you feed yourself and you've got somewhere to sleep, it's a nice life. I've kind of considered how could I keep dropping the idea to my partner that maybe we should like walk around the entirety of the UK or do the national parks again, but add the other 5 and walk between them as well. All these ideas, but we'll see.
Wow. I mean, yeah, we're talking not just weeks, but months, if not years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Probably
That's a lifestyle. Yeah,
exactly. It's a big change.
Okay. Well, you mentioned some of the fears that people have before going on these adventures. And actually so much of it is just your mind trying to, I guess, process lots of different worst case scenarios, which is actually a very healthy way to kind of think, what would I do in this situation? But fundamentally, when you're actually out there, all you have to deal with is what is happening to you now. And you just react to everything. And whether it's coming across a field full of cows, you don't have to worry about that until you get there. And then you think, in your scenario, how am I going to get through this moment? Or if, let's say, you injure yourself, then you'll work out in that moment how to get yourself to safety. There'll always be a way, but you can never put that in your mind to begin with and have all these scenarios playing in your head, because it will just send you crazy and you won't ever leave the front door.
Yeah. No, it's 100% true. And we do worry about a lot of things that aren't going to happen. And it's actually something we talked about in our retreat last week, that particularly the British Isles, we have removed any kind of human natural predators. We are the main predators. So, and there are still predators in Europe, not as many. And there's obviously a lot of predators when you go to African countries and a lot of parts of the Americas. So there is very little to fear. There is actually, humans are the biggest predator in this country. That's probably one of the biggest fears. And yeah, I did have a couple of incidents with cows. And so I got a bit wary of cows after that. And I had a couple of friends join me. And I do think sometimes you kind of work things up. And my friend who joined me was very, very nervous of cows. And so it kind of worked up in me. And it was actually the day after they left that I had a quite scary incident with a cow. But multiple cows. But I dealt with it. And yeah, I think you just deal with it as it comes. And I didn't really have much to fear at all. I really didn't. Like, I think there's more chance of things happening walking, cars on the roads and things like that. Whereas when you're walking across mountains and hills, like as long as, I had my first aid kit, I had, I was so nervous about ticks. I got like massively in my head that I was going to get Lyme's disease from a tick. I didn't get a single tick the whole time. My dog got like 9 ticks in Northumberland, but plucked him out. She was fine. So once you've seen one and you've plucked one out, you're like, that wasn't so bad. I think, once you've kind of, something's happened, you're kind of like, it wasn't that fearful. It was all right. So, but yeah, we don't really have to worry that much in this country.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. So how did you plan? The logistics would have been a job in itself. Traveling in between each national park, but also then having a route that would allow you a place to sleep every night. What was the initial stage of when you set off? What did you hope this adventure would look like in terms of where you'd be staying? And
So it did definitely change over time. Originally, I had planned to camp a lot more than I did. For a couple of reasons why I didn't in the end. One, like the extra weight of all the camping gear, plus like the cooking gear, plus you then need to carry your food for dinner. Like there's a lot of like additional stuff. And the first 2 nights I did wild camp in Northumberland, and my brother and his wife, now wife, joined me. We kind of hiked separately and then met up to camp. He helped carry some of my stuff, and I was like, I just don't think I can do this like along the way. So I kind of, I knew I wasn't going to camp that much. I was going to camp maybe a couple of nights in each park. But then you have to carry your stuff the whole time, even if you're only camping 2 nights. So it was just kind of like, oh, why? So that was one reason, like the extra weight on my feet, and just for that distance, like it makes a big difference. However, after last week, so much on last week, I would like to do the Welsh National Parks later this year, and I think I want to try and camp and be outside even more. But anyway, that's a side thought. The other reason is I was working quite closely with the national parks, because through my work with the Peak District Foundation, I'd connected with them. I was, where possible, I was meeting rangers along the way. I was meeting up with like projects, learning like what was happening in the national parks. And they don't, though they actually, off record, don't mind people wild camping if they are, you know, sensible people that leave no trace and do it in the way you're supposed to wild camp. They don't really want to be seen to be promoting it. And so me sharing it all on my Instagram and then asking them to share it, they were kind of like, we're not going to share that if you've been wild camping, because we can't promote that. So then I was like, well, you know, if I want them to engage with it and stuff, I'm not going to do that. So I did wild camp in Dartmoor because that's where you can, in parts of, not the whole of Dartmoor, but large parts of it. So I ended up staying in kind of B&Bs and even hotels. I stayed with people I knew. I got quite a lot of free accommodation through my blog. So I've written lots of reviews and stuff of where I stayed. So it ended up costing, even though I got quite a lot free, it ended up costing a bit more than I had hoped. But it did help, you know. Part of me is kind of, I spoke at an event a couple of weeks ago, Adventure Queens, around a campfire, and somebody had said like, oh, I'm not a proper adventurer, I like an ensuite. And I was like, well, I actually had an ensuite like 90% of the time that I was on my hike. So part of me was kind of like, oh, I'm a fraud, I'm not doing it properly. But, you know, I still hiked every day, and it just meant I had a comfy bed and a shower at the end of the day. And I think my dog appreciated that too. So, but yeah, the planning was a lot. Like the logistics was a lot. And you can see why big adventurers have like a whole team supporting them. If I could have woken up every day and somebody had been like, here's your route, here's your packed lunch, here's where you're staying tonight, you're meeting this person here, that would have just been amazing. So having to like constantly at night be like, right, what's my route tomorrow? Have I got my accommodation for like in 3 nights time? You know, there was a lot of kind of logistics. And I can see why my dad originally was like, you need a lot longer to plan this. This is huge. Because you're somewhere different every night, pretty much, apart from like I had a couple of rest nights together for 10 weeks. Like that's a lot, even just the accommodation. And then I had my dog, so making sure there was somewhere I could buy dog food, making sure that there was somewhere we could eat that was dog friendly, that where we stayed was dog friendly, which limited where we stayed. And it was sometimes a bit chicken and egg of like, I need to plan my route, but my route needs to have accommodation at the right point. So sometimes I'd have to slightly tweak my route to go to where the B&B was or whatever. So yeah, logistically it was a lot. And I feel like it would be a very different experience if I was just wild camping and I was just walking and I had my vague route and I would just kind of sleep wherever I found at the end of each day. I think it would be that's what I'm quite tempted to try, because I think it's just a very, very different experience.
There's pros and cons, I think, for each version of that adventure.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the extra weight of carrying your food and your camping equipment and cooking equipment. And that comes a toll on you when you're out there having this experience, because every footstep you take, there's those extra kilograms, which over time and the miles that you were doing was going to add up to something that would, cause your back a lot of pain, cause your feet a lot of pain, it would take its toll on you physically and mentally. And so then, I mean, we all have this glamorous view of wild camping, in this beautiful, lush area where, you wake up to this gorgeous sunrise with this like mountain view. But sometimes the reality of that is you can actually struggle to find a suitable place to even wild camp. Or then you're sacrificing on something that actually isn't that attractive, or you're just going for convenience because suddenly it's dark and you have to set up quickly because you don't want to be walking past then. But then I shouldn't ever let anyone feel that they shouldn't want to have the comforts of a warm shower and a comfy bed at the end of their night when they've just been out adventuring all day. And if that is what you desire, because you want to have that full reset so that you can switch off completely, not have to worry about, sleeping next to the long grass where there's ticks nearby and having that fear that's playing in your mind, then great, like do that. If that's what makes that adventure accessible to you, then there's a place for that. Yeah,
100%. I think it's like when I said with our last week when we had our 12 hours outside and they called it like pick your own adventure. That's what it was like, do what you want to do. And I think that's really important because, like part of me maybe wishes I could have camped the whole time, but I don't think it would have been quite as enjoyable. There would have been a lot more periods of pain. Maybe I'd have got more out of it. Like, I don't know. It's very... It's difficult to know, but I was also quite lucky with the weather most of my hike. It had been really, really rainy up until like pretty much the day before I left. And though there was rain, there really wasn't that much rain in the 10-week period. So if it had been, weather makes such a difference to an experience. And sometimes you just need a comfy bed and that's okay. And I think people need to do what is right for them. An adventure for one person is very different to someone else. Like to one person, just like a couple of miles of walking in the countryside, it's a huge adventure if it's not something they do all the time. And that's okay. So it's trying to not compare, because it's very easy to be like, so I'm like, I walked for 10 weeks. I'm like, but somebody else walked for 10 months and it's only so small, whereas other people are like, oh my god, 10 weeks, I just did a week. So it's all, we're constantly comparing, but you got to do what works for you,
and you can find that place in just one day hike.
Exactly. 100%.
It doesn't have to be How did you process the emotions, I suppose, of this physical journey that you're on, also the logistical nightmare of trying to coordinate so much, but also wanting to enjoy that experience and be present, but also knowing that you were your own like support crew as well. You talked about having friends with you along the way and a partner for some of it, but I imagine some stretches you were completely on your own as well.
Most of it I was on my own, and I wanted to be on my own, and actually I found it a bit strange when people did join me. It was great. I loved having friends and people join me along the way, but sometimes I'd be like, okay, I'm kind of ready to be on my own again. I was quite nervous. People are like, aren't you going to get lonely? And I thought maybe I would, but I didn't really get lonely at all. Like I was fine, like more fine than I thought I would be. But I did have my dog with me, and I think she went home for a week. She got a thorn in her paw when we were in the Yorkshire Dales. And it was also when it was that really hot spell at the end of August, early September last year. And she's very fluffy. So luckily, my mum had come to visit me in the Yorkshire Dales. And so my mum took her home and she went back to my partner. And then I was going on to the Lake District and it was again still hot. So I was like, I think just let her have a week off. So I did the Lake District and the second half of the Yorkshire Dales by myself. And that I found a bit lonely. particularly the first couple of days after she'd gone, I kind of realised how much I spoke to her. But it was different. And I was kind of glad she wasn't there because I knew it was too hot for her. Also, like in the Lake District, I was doing Scarfell Pike, and you've got to kind of get over the boulders and scrabble up the scree. And it just wouldn't have been ideal for a dog. Dogs do it, but it wouldn't have been ideal. So that was a moment that I felt really proud of myself. I've done Scarfell Pike a couple of times before, but never on my own. And it was really foggy, like you couldn't see far in advance ahead of you. And so I was a bit nervous at that. And I'd kind of like told my partner I was going up, and I was like, if I get reception, I'll message you at the top. And I didn't do that the whole way around, but for this one, I was kind of like a bit nervous. But I made it to the top, and as I got to the top, the clouds lifted and I had 360 views. And it was just one of those moments where you're kind of like, yeah, this is why I'm doing it. And it sounds a bit cliched, but yeah, it's like, this is where I'm meant to be right now. Like I've made the right decision doing this hike. And I had that feeling quite a lot throughout the hike. There was moments of tears. There was hard moments. There was times when I had a lot of blisters on my feet. And there was a couple of times where I left stuff behind. And that was, at one point I had to call a taxi to go back to the B&B to pick up my battery pack, because my phone didn't even last the day because I was using it for photos and videos and navigation and stuff. And that was like stressful and tiring, and so there was definitely moments of big emotion, but there was a lot of moments where I just felt this kind of calm of, yeah, I like this, and also that realization that you're like, I'm a hiker, I'm doing it. And the further I got through, I think it was after the first, so I did Northumberland first, and at the end I was like, I did it, I've done one park. And nothing really bad happened. And I was like, oh, I've still got 9 parks to go. And basically after each park, I kind of believed a bit more that I was going to finish it. And I definitely was tired. By the final couple of parks, I was really tired. And when the end came, I was kind of ready to finish. However, I do feel there's something psychological in that. In like, if I was going for 3 months, I'd have probably managed 3 months, and the 2 weeks before the end, 2.5. I almost did go for 3 months. If I was going for 6 months. So, I think I would have managed it. And then when it had got closer to the end, your mind starts to almost like shut down, and you're like, okay, I'm almost finished. This is really hard. I've got to get to the end. So yeah, I think, if I was going for 2 weeks, I'd have probably had the same thing a couple of days before the end. I think there's definitely something in our psyches kind of processing how long something's for and preparing yourself for it. So yeah, there was a lot of up and down, and I tried to have moments of really being present. The thing I found quite surprising was I was all ready to like listen to loads of podcasts. I'd like created playlists. I was like, I'm going to learn stuff. I'm going to it's going to be great. I listened to 2 podcasts in 10 weeks. And I think I listened to my motivational hiking playlist twice. Otherwise, I just didn't have my headphones in. I was just, people are like, what do you do all day? I was like, I just walked. I'd be focused on when do I need to turn, like checking my phone to make sure I didn't get lost and I was following my route. And that was all I was thinking about a lot of the time. I was literally just thinking about where am I going? What happens next? And I didn't get bored at all, not once. So, yeah.
You talked about having these moments where the clouds lifted and you had this realization of what you were doing and really understanding why, and I guess this is the beauty of having a longer adventure where you can be out. A bit like when trying to watch wildlife, and if you just go for one instance, you're not going to find something. But if you sit there for days and weeks, eventually you'll see that magical moment. Then you'll understand why that you put yourself out there and had that patience. And this is, I guess, the beauty of a longer adventure is that you're going to have your ups and downs, but you're never going to have those high highs unless you put yourself in that position to allow that to happen. You're never going to know when that is and what moments they're going to be. But when they do surface, you will just have this uplifting that will be so magical you can't probably put it into words.
Yeah.
And you'll and it because of all the hardship of hiking all day and battling through like the morning rain or something, and suddenly you understand the reason why you are putting yourself through this.
And sometimes it's not when you expect, like being at the top of Scarfell Pike kind of makes sense, right? You're kind of, and I almost felt prouder when I got to the bottom again, because it was like, right, I've got to the top, now I need to get down again. Had a pie at the Dungeon Gill, popular spot, and was like, yeah, I just did that. But yeah, there was also times when I'd just be walking through a field and I'd just have this like feeling of like, yeah, this is good. I'm enjoying this. And I'd be like, I'm a hiker. I like walking. So yeah, you never know when those moments are going to hit. And but yeah, they did at various points. Maybe I'd see something, or the sun had come out, or sometimes when I was walking through the rain, which there weren't many moments of, but I'd be like, yeah, this is. Sometimes the rain comes and I'm okay with that too. And I'm just going to deal with it. And I've got all my waterproofs. And yeah, maybe if it had been chucking it down for like days and days on end, I'd have felt differently.
I want you to take me and the listeners on a whistle-stop tour of your tour through all the 10 national parks that you went through in England. You started in Northumberland.
Yeah.
I talked about it being kind of probably one of the wildest ones we have. I don't know if that's completely true, but I think you mentioned that it's got the smallest population of any English national park. Only 1,800 residents. So what can you tell us? Enlighten us about your experience in Northumberland.
Right, so Northumberland, yeah, it's definitely the wildest. I think I went a whole day of walking where I didn't see anyone. It was very hard to find places to stay. And most of the places to stay are just on the edge. So I kind of zigzagged a bit in Northumberland. So I was kind of going in and out. I got the closest to being lost in Northumberland because I can't remember the storm, but there was a storm, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, that really battered Northumberland. And there was still damage from that storm, and so some of the paths that were meant to be paths had disappeared because like trees had fallen over them, and then things had grown. And because not many people go hiking in Northumberland, not all the paths, there's so many paths across national parks, and if I wasn't always on one of the main paths, because you can actually pretty much do the Pennine Way, but it kind of goes all around the skirts around the edge, and I wanted to go through the middle. And so I did do the Pennine Way for the final couple of days, but the first bit I was like moshing up lots of little paths together. So yeah, there was a quite scary moment where I was like, and I think that's where Cookie got lots of ticks, because we had to walk through these like huge ferns, and I was like, is this the path? Is it not? I had my app Komoot, which kind of helped me. I'm like trying to follow the dot, and then you'd get somewhere and you'd be like, there's going to be a path there, and there's no path. Where's the path? And there's also a lot of army land, so MOD, Ministry of Defence land. So, and when the red flags are flying, you're not meant to, that's when they're doing practices. And so there was one day, it was the same day I'd almost got lost, and I'd found my way out, and then I was like, oh my God, and now the red flag's up, and I've got to like walk across this Ministry of Defence land. Like, what am I going to do? And luckily the path was like on the edge. And I was like walking on this path, and I could see all these army folk like doing shooting practice and stuff ahead of me. And I'm like, they're going to make me turn around. And it's like a 7-mile detour. And I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. And closer I got. And then they walked up to me, and I was kind of like, oh God. And they were just checking on me, and they were like, yeah, stick to the path. Don't go right at all, or you'll be,
you'll be cannon fodder.
Yeah, exactly. No.
That wilderness must have been quite special though, and unique to experience.
Yeah.
Especially when I guess you came to the more busier national parks.
Yeah, because the thing is, our national parks are very different to national parks in a lot of other countries, in that they are living, breathing national parks. People live in them, people work in them. There's a lot of farming. A lot of the national parks in America are complete wilderness. Nobody lives there. Nobody works there, or very, very few. And obviously they're a lot bigger in America as well. But so Northumberland is kind of a bit more what people might expect, I guess. But But it's not my favourite. And most people that go to Northumberland go to the forest, which isn't actually Kilda Forest, which isn't in the park. It's on the edge. Or they go to the coast, which also isn't in the park. The national park is not quite as exciting as maybe as those two places, but there is a lot of beauty still there. And they have a lot of incredible dark sky areas as well. So yeah, I definitely return.
So that's up in the very northeast of England.
Yeah.
And you continued down, I suppose, that eastern belt, south of Newcastle and Middlesbrough, down to the North York Moors, your second one.
So North York Moors is probably one of my favourite parks, one of the ones I knew the most. And I love any park that had coast. I was like, I need to include some coastal walking. So I kind of walked across and then went down the coast because, and I've actually done that coastal walk a few times, or bits of it. So I love the variety of the North York Moors. However, the North York Moors was where I had the cow incident, where I got surrounded by, or pinned against a wall by 30 cows, which was very scary. But yeah, I really love that park. And I guess one thing that I noticed throughout the different parks is you really do start to notice things like, so in the North York Moors, you can see the degradation, like along the coast, the erosion of the coastal path, and where bits of coastal path have had to be like closed and you've got to go around. And so you start to kind of really see some of those climate change, environmental things. You become quite aware of them as you're walking. But yeah, I mean, I love Whitby. I love Scarborough. Stayed in this incredible glamping, off-grid glamping place called Coast and Camplight. I always get them the wrong way around. Really, really special place, and sat and chatted to the owner around a campfire for a couple of hours. And yeah, that was brilliant.
Those are the two that I've not visited, and I think I would really like to go to the North York Moors and Whitby. I've heard such great things about that.
Yeah, Whitby's brilliant.
Great seaside town.
And yeah, a lot of great stuff there.
Okay. And then across western side to Yorkshire Dales.
Yeah, so the Yorkshire Dales, that is where I was suddenly like affronted by people.
It's a very popular place for hiking.
Yeah, and I think it was when it was really hot. So my partner joined me for the first part of the first day, and we've been walking along the river, and it'd been quite quiet. We passed a few people, and then we just came around this corner, and it was like it was a festival. There was probably like well over 1,000 people there. I can't remember the name of the village, but they'd just camped. They'd parked by the side of the river. There was kids in like dinghies in the river. There was people like barbecuing. And I was just like, whoa, I think it was the first time I'd seen that many people in 2.5 weeks. And it just felt like a bit of a front and an affront. And I was like, oh, this is what they call a honeypot. This is where everybody goes. So yeah, it's interesting. And you really notice it when you're walking, and the further you get away from somewhere, you see less and less people. And then you can tell when you're getting closer to a popular spot again as like more people. And it shows you how most people never really go into the wilderness. They're never more than like a couple of miles from their car. And it felt really clear that you could really kind of see that difference of the people that are really going for it and those that are just having a little stroll. So yeah, but I do love the Yorkshire Dales. I found it reminded me the most of the Peak District, which I obviously know the most. The kind of limestone walls.
It's quite common to do 3 peaks of the Yorkshire Dales.
So I did the highest peak and I had to go back in. So I kind of like finished my hike and then I went back in the next day to do the highest peak because I couldn't quite make it work easily on my hike. And there was a lot of people doing the Yorkshire 3 peaks. As I went up in the morning, people were like running down, ready to do their second one.
Did you see the Ribblehead ride up?
Yes.
It's a great sight,
I got the train back into there and walked from there up and back down again. Yeah.
It's a fantastic structure, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. It's incredible.
Yeah. Further across, western side to the very edge of England, the Lake District National Park.
Yep.
I heralded it as possibly the most popular national park.
Yeah.
From top of people's lists. Because, I mean, I guess in England, it's got the biggest mountains and it's got lots of lakes.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of mix of lots of different things you can do there. You can experience, things at water level, at ground level, or things,
And it is, so people always ask me like, which is my favourite? And obviously the Peak District. But the Lake District is always one. It is literally on another level to the other parks because I think I can't remember the exact number, but out of like the top 100 peaks in England, so not Scotland, because obviously Scotland has a lot of tall peaks that are the tallest, but of the majority of the highest peaks in England are in the Lake District. So Northumberland has the next highest in the national parks, which is the Cheviot. And so it's literally on another level. Like the lakes at the bottom, the mountains at the top, like the views and landscapes are just not like the other national parks. Because of the scale of it. So it's beautiful, and so it's popular for a reason, and it's got great towns as well, like Keswick and Ambleside, like really lovely, beautiful towns with lots of great outdoorsy shops and things. So yeah, it is a really special place. And I met a few people. I did that. I know a friend joined me at the end for the final day, but the rest of it I was on my own. But it's just, you meet lots of kind of outdoor people that are quite friendly along the hikes. Like I feel like I had more chats with people along the way, maybe because it's busier. It's not like crazy busy, but you're more likely to suddenly be kind of almost walking side by side with someone rather than just occasionally passing someone. So I had some quite nice chats, but it was also, again, really hot when I was there.
Was that a tougher park to traverse across because of the landscape? And
and I think I did it at the right time because I was definitely building up my strength. So I did a lot of training before I left, but ultimately on these kind of adventures, a lot of the training you do on the adventure. So I could feel myself getting fitter, and I'm glad that I didn't do that first, because you can also do the 3 highest peaks in the Lake District. So I'd done that a couple of years before as part of an organised thing, and and it was 3 peaks in 2 days, so not in 24 hours, but the 3 Lake District highest peaks. And I'd found that really hard, like really, really tough. And I didn't do 3 peaks this time. I just did 1. But even so, like I went up and down Scarfell Pike and was like, that was all right. I did all right. Did some swimming in the Derwent and Windermere. It's popular for a reason. And it is, I think it is the most visited, I think. And most people it's different to the Peak District in that the Lake District, people go for a weekend. So there's a lot of accommodation in the Lake District. Whereas the Peak District, most people go for the day because we've got 20 million people within an hour's drive of the Peak District.
You got Manchester one side, Sheffield another,
Derby, Nottingham, Leicester. Okay,
yeah. It's like 3 shires as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot of people go to the Peak District for the day, and there isn't actually that much accommodation. Whereas the Lake District, you can tell people are just there for a while, and there's a lot of B&Bs and hotels and etc. It's different.
So they were the northern ones that you did, except for the Peak District, which you saved for last.
Yes.
And now we're going, I guess, into the southern part of England, and you whipped across from the western side to the eastern side to East Anglia to the Broads, which is, you mentioned earlier, it's more unique because a lot of it is actually waterways, and it's very flat there.
Yes. It's very flat. And so in between the Lake District and the Broads was the only time I went home. I was home for about 20 hours, picked up the car and the canoe and my boyfriend and we went together down to the Broads. And because it was originally, my plan had been to canoe the whole thing, but I had spoken to all the canoe experts of the Broads, and actually it's very hard to canoe in one direction, and they all thought I was bonkers. They'd be like, what? And you just canoe that way and then you canoe back to your car, like what? So they didn't really get it, and it wasn't really that possible because some of the Broads are quite big and they can be almost tidal, and it can be potentially quite dangerous on a canoe. And so I canoed the first day and the last day, and then I still walked from the top to the bottom, but in a kind of wiggle, because there's 7 spokes of the Broads, and I did 5 of them. So I canoed 2 and then I walked 3. So
I guess these are spokes because it's all the
waterways coming in. Yeah, exactly. So again, it doesn't have that high of a population, but that's because the actual edges of the national parks are mainly just around the water. So there aren't that many people. Most people live just outside. It's not very accessible,
yeah.
But it's the canoeing was amazing. I felt like I had my Where the Crawdads Sing. If you've seen that film or read that book, it's about a girl who lives in the marshes. So there was moments where I was kind of, oh, this is amazing. And the dog was great. She loved it. She'd just like sit up front watching. But the walking, don't tell the Broads, was actually really boring because it is so flat. And a lot of the time you can't see anything. It's just reeds. You know that the water's there. You might see like a sailboat kind of 100 yards in the distance going past, but you can't actually see the water. And so and I thought, oh, it's going to be really easy, so I planned quite long days. But actually I found out later from my physio that flat walking can be quite hard because you're using the same muscles all day long, whereas when you're going up and down, you're changing which leg muscles you're using. So I found the days really long, boring, slow, and then actually quite painful. So it was very different. And I loved, I think if you go to the Broads, like it's ultimately it's about the water.
Yeah. So
hire a canoe, hire a boat, get on the water.
I know the Broads quite well because I've got family in Norfolk.
Okay.
And yeah, I was about to say that it is actually best done on the water. It's a fantastic experience. You can hire day boats to go out there from like somewhere like Wroxham, which is where I know. And even that experience, I mean, it's hard for me to explain here in this moment, but the houses that line the waterside, just unlike anything you'd see in England.
Yeah. They are amazing. It did make me want to have a house.
Very
on
Dutch
the water.
in that sense, of like in some of the Dutch waterways. But you don't see that in many other places, and so not doing any disjustice to the Broads for its lack of like walking experience, but do definitely go and visit. And go on the 100%.
Water. No, I did enjoy it. It was a different experience. I loved it for like different reasons. It's not the kind of place you're going to go on like some big hiking mission. It's like a place to go and enjoy and be on the water and still walk about, but. Yeah.
Speaking of hiking missions, your next one was the South Downs, which has the longest, I suppose, stretch of kind of A to B that you could do and that you did do on your adventure.
Yeah, so I did the South Downs Way. So not many of the parks have clear routes across them, but the South Downs is one that does. That goes, I could have done the short access, could have done that in a day pretty much if I went down the shortest bit. But I did the long one. And so I did 7 days of walking in a row. So normally I was doing like about 5 days and then a day of rest and a day of travel. And so it was hard. Like, towards the end, I could feel myself getting really tired. I met some great people. I walked with some friends. I stayed with a kind of friend of a friend who was really lovely. It's kind of, the South Downs Way is a great route, but I don't think you see the best of the South Downs on the South Downs Way because it's quite accessible. So a lot of it is kind of along farm tracks and things, or you're kind of going across the tops of hills. But I guess the thing I found is that you're kind of going along the top and you see the sea. So I did it the opposite way. So Eastbourne to Winchester. Most people do it the other way around. You see the sea to your left, and then you see like the North Downs to your right. But then it's kind of the same the whole way. There's a bit of up and down, but a lot of it is kind of like along the top. And so to find somewhere to stay, I often had to like go down and back up again. So I kind of saw it as like lots of rolling hills.
And And you need to dip into those little towns and villages that are quaint.
Yeah, they've
have
got
those
really
nice farm shops or village stores, which are like the heart and beating heart and soul of this little tiny hamlet that has like a post office and a coffee shop and a bakery and a grocery store all in one little tiny room. Yeah,
there was some really lovely little villages. And one bit that I really enjoyed was the year before I'd been on a press trip to Felpham, which is just outside Bognor, and we'd been on a cycling tour into the South Downs. And I'm not really a cycler, kind of like mountain biking, but it was a really fun trip out. And at one point I suddenly had this realization that I was walking down this like quite steep bit that we'd cycled down, and it was just quite nice to have that moment, that kind of full circle of like, oh, I was here, I've cycled down this. And then suddenly it's very, you quickly feel at home places, I think, sometimes when you just kind of go back for a second time. But otherwise, I didn't really know much about the South Downs. But again, it's quite popular because of the population around it. I did also I went off the route to go have a night in Brighton because I love Brighton. So I did a brief kind of skit out and back in again, which was good fun. So and had some food that wasn't just pub food, because pretty much everywhere it was, when you're just in little villages, you pretty much just have pubs. And so I ate a lot of pie and chips, fish and chips, a lot of chips. So I went into Brighton.
Many people were probably thinking that was a great way to live, but actually when it's day to day.
Yeah, it gets a bit much.
Next, you were off to the New Forest.
Yeah. So I really liked the New Forest. It was really, I think because of the flatness again, I was kind of like, oh, I'm not sure. But I found it really quite varied, because you've got, obviously there's forest. There's actually quite a lot of areas that aren't forest. There's a lot of like heathland. It's quite a kind of mystical place. So there's a lot of kind of folklore there. And then also there's just the ponies.
Just wild ponies.
And I just felt like I was on safari for a week. Like, it was just amazing. I remember the first one I saw, and then suddenly they're just everywhere. And the time that I was there was also pigs roaming free, which they bring out 2 months a year to eat all the acorns, because the acorns are poisonous to the ponies. So that was cool. And I was like, oh my God, there's a pig. And it was rutting season. So I went on a rutting walk, and I didn't quite see the rutting, but I saw a stag, guarding his harem of women, looking out for a fellow stag to fight with. And I joined a accessible cycling project for a morning and went on an accessible bike ride where they had all these different kinds of bikes, like 2 people side by side, electric ones, like all these different formats of bikes for people with different needs. So that was really special as well. Walked with a ranger for a day. Yeah, I really liked the New Forest. It was one of my favourites, and I think it wasn't one I really knew. And so when people ask me which is my favourite, I often say the New Forest. In terms of, it's probably the one that surprised me the most. It was like a good surprise.
And that is near the coast as well.
Yes.
So there's kind of, even staying there, you get so much kind of from that. It's close to Bournemouth, close to Southampton. You've got the cities nearby, but then you've also got the coastline, the Isle of Wight, obviously, which is another national landscape.
And it is quite heavily populated because it's quite small as well.
Next on your list was Dartmoor.
Yeah.
Now you're going really far southwest to explore those two in that region there.
Yeah, so everyone had told me how changeable the weather in Dartmoor could be, and how the moorlands are just so vast and you can get lost there really easily. And so I was quite nervous about that. But when I was there in October, it was bright sunshine and blue skies. So I had a great time. And yeah, again, quite magical folklore-y. I met a landowner who was in his Land Rover at the top of a moor and told him what I was doing. And then he told me all these stories and mystical things about, I don't know, a girl that had years ago walked with her family and they'd gone through the bog, and you have to be really careful of the bogs. And she'd survived by sleeping in the belly of a dead pony's carcass. Anyway, that's the short version. So I feel like everyone was very friendly that I met. Like people, I'd like walk past people and they'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing?" Yeah, it was very, very friendly. And the last day I went again, I had to go kind of across and then back in to do the highest peak. And that was when the Dartmoor weather came, and it was fog and rain, and I couldn't see like more than 2 meters in front of me. But I managed to find my way to the peak, which is called High Will Hayes, locally known as High Willies. So I made it to the top of High Willies and then headed back down again. And I also wild camped. So on a moorland, I did a night of wild camping. And you can't actually, people think you can wild camp anywhere in Dartmoor. Technically, there's certain areas that you can wild camp in. So again, I met with some rangers and they helped me kind of choose a direction to go for wild camping. And so I'm really glad I did that, because I feel like that's a big part of Dartmoor, especially because they've recently been fighting for that right. It was taken off them and they've got it back again. So I wanted to make sure that I did that, had that wild camping experience.
Yeah, there's some military land there as well, isn't there?
Yes. So where High Willies is, you have to check that the red flags aren't flying and you can walk. So
staying in the southwest, it was Exmoor.
Yeah, so Exmoor, I was almost home. At this point, I was definitely getting tired. Walked all the way along the coast, and then kind of went diagonally across the middle. The last coastal day, I had my friends Andy and Gosha came to meet me with their 2 kids who were about, I'm really bad with ages, maybe like 1 and 3 or something like that. And so I thought they'd like have them on their backs, and they'd asked me about my route. So I'd like told them we're doing the coastal route, and it was about 10 miles. And Andy was like, "Oh yeah, I've done that loads before. That'll be fine." And I was meeting them kind of part way along, and they came with a double buggy, and I was like, "You sure?" And he was like, yeah, I've done this route loads. Anyways, we left with the double buggy, carried on walking, and the path kind of got narrower and narrower. And we made it through. I laughed so much that day. And we had to like take the kids out the pram. We had to fold it up, lift it over stiles. Andy was like pushing it up it kind of goes, as coastal walks often do, there's like so much up and down. And we got to near the end, and then there was a sign that said coastal path, rugged coastal path. And it turned out that Andy and Gosha had done the coastal path quite a lot, which is a nice like wide across the tops route, and then there's the rugged coastal path which kind of does this along the edge. But they were like, you know what, we'd have been at home today, we're really glad we came to join you. And it was an adventure. They may have put their kids off hiking for life.
Was this the coastal path, like the Valley of the Rocks area?
Yeah, so that
Stunning,
was that's incredible. That was the day before I think I met them. Really, really beautiful part of the coast.
And I guess you went to Lynmouth and Linton.
Yes.
Did you go on the vernacular railway?
No, I didn't. I stayed near the top and then walked down the next day.
Okay.
But yeah, another really beautiful part. And then went kind of inland for the highest peak. And it was quite rainy the last couple of days. And I was getting a bit like, it felt like a slog. But I was like, I'm nearly there. I need to, keep going.
So you'd completed 9 of the 10 English national parks.
Yes.
By this point, and now you were returning home to the Peak District, which we mentioned earlier. You're also you're on the board of the Peak District Foundation, charity that. Well, I guess a double-ended question is like, tell me about your experience in the Peak District, but also marry it between why you also like to give back to the place that gives you so much. Yeah.
So I was going back home, which was great. It was a bit of a challenge to get there because it was when there was flooding, and I actually got kind of stranded in Bristol and had to find some very strange way home, and my partner had to drive to Birmingham to pick me up because all the trains were cancelled, and it was a bit chaotic for the final to get to the start point. And even when we drove to the north, which is where I started, my stepdad had to come with the truck, and we kept having to turn around because roads were closed due to flooding. So even just getting to my starting point was hard, but I made it. And it felt good to be home. So ultimately, it was the Peak District that I was raising money for. So I aimed to raise £10,000 for the Peak District Foundation, and I think I raised close to 11,000. But then it was also match funded up to £10,000 by ALPKit, who sponsored me.
Oh, well done.
And so ALPKit match funded, they put together a £10,000 pot that was to be split across the 10 national parks that I'd visited. So basically each park got £1,000, which projects could apply for. So that was incredible. And that final week was when a lot of that final like donations came in that saw me kind of, I think it was like the day after I finished that I hit the target, and then it went up a bit more after that, which was amazing. And so it felt good, and it just felt like home. And I started to see all these kind of similarities of like, oh, this bit's a bit like the Yorkshire Dales, and this bit's a bit like the North York Moors, and this bit's a bit like Dartmoor, which was nice. And I made sure my route kind of went to places that I hadn't really been to before, because there's an area of the Peak District near where I live that I've done a lot. And I was like, I could have just gone straight down, but I kind of did this zigzag to visit new places that I didn't really know. So that was fun. I had people join me every day, but not always for the whole day. So friends, trustees from the foundation, family, and I tried to see some of the projects that the foundation fundraisers for. And so half the money that I raised went to rebuild Long Causeway, which is a path near Hathersage. And it got really, really badly damaged in the floods. And it was an accessible path, so people with wheelchairs, pushchairs, etc. And they just couldn't, because it got completely potholed. And so some of the funding has gone towards fixing that path. And that was partly a decision that happened as I was walking along it, because it had literally been like the week before that all this damage had happened. And I was like, oh, what happened? And so we agreed that some of the money would go towards that, which was great. So yeah, it was.
This is a real reminder, actually, of the importance of creating these pathways, because you've talked about going through some of the wildest places in England, and if it is not for having an accessible path, you would never have had those experiences. And so many of these places do have paths that have been created by volunteers over decades.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People think, our national parks are free to visit, as they should be, but they are not free to upkeep. And I said at the start, like the thing is that more people are visiting national parks, which is brilliant, but the more people that visit, even if you are the most careful ever, the more kind of degradation to those pathways is going to happen. So the more kind of potential things that need to be done to kind of fix them. And also just signage and things like that. All of that is time and money, even if you've got volunteers doing a lot of it, which they often are. The Pennine Way is a great example of the majority of the Pennine Way is like these massive big pavers that have been over time put down so that people can walk across this boggy land without walking through kind of a foot of bogland. And also it keeps people to the path rather than going off and damaging the whole area. So yeah, all these things cost money. And people should, and I'm a big believer of everyone being able to enjoy our national parks. And a lot of the work we do around access is also around people coming into the park who wouldn't normally get the chance. So people from inner city Sheffield or Manchester to experience those benefits of being in nature. But the more people that come, the more stuff you have to do to make it okay for both people and the environment. So yeah, it's a bit of a circle. There's also the other thing that I learned along the way around with all the national parks is there's always that balance between tourists versus locals. And that's always quite a tricky one for the national park authorities to balance.
You want to
well.
advertise for tourists, but you don't want to piss off the locals.
Yeah, and you kind of want people to come, but you don't want too many people to come, right. But you want everyone to be welcome. So it's like it's a pretty hard balance to get right. But yeah, my final day in the Peak District, my sister joined me, and it was really wet, and it had been quite wet that week, so it was so muddy. And the final stretch before I got to a little bit of road to where I had a little welcome gathering at a hotel, it was like literally the mud was coming in up over our boots, mud and cow shit. It was like the muddiest day of 10 weeks, the muddiest, like wettest day. But I was just having a great time. So I was like, well, this is the end. Doesn't matter. I don't need these boots anymore. I don't need to put these muddy, pooey boots on tomorrow. And when I got to the finish line, there was about an inch of muddy poo in my boot. So it was a good way to end. And my partner's actually cut my soles off and framed them for me. So I have the soles of my boots that I wore for the 10 weeks, which have still got little stones and holes in them. And I wonder how I managed.
Bits of cow shit, I guess.
Yeah. I cleaned them a bit, but yeah, there's probably still something.
Oh, amazing. And you can see, I guess in that image, there's this wear and tear of your journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
story behind it all.
Yeah, framed up in my house, which is a nice little reminder.
How can we all support our national parks? Just by visiting? Supporting the local economy within?
So that's obviously an important part of it. By visiting them in a kind way, I think. So sticking to the paths where you can, and if you don't, then making sure you are being careful by leaving no trace, by not having barbecues, by following the signs. So I love wild swimming, and some of my most popular blog posts are wild swimming spots in the Peak District. And one of the spots I used to swim, I got asked to remove the location and stuff, because now for wildlife reasons they don't want people to swim there. So there are signs up saying, there's rare birds, there's habitats here that we don't want to disturb. People still swim there and people still have barbecues there, and that is causing problems for the local habitats. So wild swimming is great, but do it where you can, and follow the signs where you can, apart from sometimes when it says private land and there should be a footpath, and I'm still going across that land.
I do the same, yeah.
So you know when to follow the signs and when not to. You can use your common sense.
Well, if there's a map that says there's a footpath there, I'll take it.
Exactly. So yeah, I'd say the main one is just looking after when you're there, you being respectful. Yeah.
Okay. You just mentioned your blog. We haven't talked about it, and I don't think we've got time to kind of go into it. I will link it below.
Yeah.
But it's something that you've had. It's been a constant in your life for, I think, 12 or 13 years now.
Yeah.
Travel blog. Started as a dating blog, but soon morphed into and evolved into just purely travel. Lots of recommendations, general musings on life as well, tips of being a freelancer, hiking adventures, glamping adventures, hotel adventures. But it all, it's called She Gets Around.
Yes, She Gets Around. Hence it was once dating as well as travel. But yeah, now just travel. And it's kind of evolved with me, I think. So now it's much more, I write a lot about the Peak District, a lot about Matlock, which is where I live. There's lots of blogs about where to eat, what to do around the Peak District and Matlock. But also international travel, but I do a bit less of that now. And yeah, lots of kind of glamping spots. But I love it. It's a small part of my income, but it's kind of a side project that's just stayed with me. It's probably the job that I have had the longest. I am always changing. I'm not someone to stick with something for very long.
It's a great way to marry your love for adventure as well and travel with.
Yeah.
Do what you love.
Yeah, exactly.
Have those experiences.
Yeah.
I just want to close with maybe a thought from you about your dreams for the future. Now that you've had this profound experience from last week and wanting to connect people back to nature, what do you hope that you can use that with going forward? And obviously now talking about this experience that you've been on and what that might become later on in your life as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, ultimately, I know I want to be outside more. and with nature. I grew up partly in a wood. So my dad bought a wood when I was 10 years old and lived in a caravan for 10 years waiting for planning permission, and then built a house and had a social enterprise there. And I'm, very lucky to have had that as a large part of my upbringing. So it's always been in the back of my mind. And then I moved to London and I was, big city girl. And since I've moved back to Derbyshire kind of 7-8 years ago, I've always kind of had this like hankering to have a piece of woodland or land or something. And I guess my thoughts on what I do with it has constantly evolved. But ultimately, last week has really solidified what I want to do, which is to find some land to rewild is quite a controversial term, but to regenerate, to look after the land in whatever that land needs. And to create a space where other people can come and connect with nature. So I would love to run retreats myself, particularly for organizations where they can come and do that kind of team building strategy, whatever it might be, but in nature. But it really depends on the land that we find. I'd love woodland, but it's much harder to get planning permission in a woodland, though my dad managed. It's hard to get planning permission most places where I live. Though I love the Peak District, I live just on the edge of the Peak District, and I'm looking for something on the edge because planning in a national park is much harder. The dream would be to build our own house. My brother's recently qualified as an architect, so I've got my in. But that's kind of that reality feels a bit further away. But ultimately, I want a space that brings nature back to life, that brings people back to life by connecting with nature. There could be mental health projects with growing things. There could be glamping. There could be I've so many ideas, but I just know that I want most of my life to be outside. And how that comes to being depends on the lands that we find.
Sounds exciting. Sounds like that would be an adventure in itself and a great journey for you.
Yeah.
I'd love to have you back on again in the future if that comes to fruition and hear the story of how that has evolved. Great. Well, let's book that in.
One thing I've learned from my hike is, like I said, like if you tell people, it's more likely to happen. So at the moment, I'm telling everyone I'm going to find some land and do this incredible thing with it. I'm also going to write a book about my hike and about why we need to look after national parks. And there's me putting it on the podcast. I will do those two things. So,
I think people would really love that experience. I mean, what you talked about earlier on was a 6-day experience, which was a training course, and not everyone would want to kind of do that. But some people want a space where they can disconnect from that. And there's I wouldn't say there's too many of those places out there.
No,
I am going to refer you to an early episode of the podcast, episode 5, building an eco campsite from scratch. David and Emma Cornthwaite. They had a similar story. They lived in London and have adventurous lifestyles, and they went and bought a patch of land in Lincolnshire, which I encourage you actually to go and visit, to see how they were able to shape a piece of land that wasn't used for anything into a campsite that has incorporated nature within it, and let nature kind of take over and control it in certain ways that kind of makes anyone who stays there, they have a reconnecting with the natural world, because rather than mow their entire grass, they've actually let the grass grow long, and they've only mowed a tiny little pitch where you can put your tent, so you can be surrounded by nature. And they've planted loads of trees, and that was an incredible journey that they went on. And I think that your kind of story will kind of mirror that, but go in its own 100%. Direction.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to have you on in the future. And,
thank you,
and go through that journey. Thank you very much, Jen. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes, where you'll also find links to things mentioned in the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find, and I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.